I'm highly honored. Good morning, everybody. I'm highly honored, and it gives me great pleasure to be invited to this summit. I thank the Holy Father, Pope Francis, for conceptualizing this program, Monsignor Sorondo for organizing the summit, and the immediate past president of the International Association of Women Judges, Honorable Justice Susanna Medina, for facilitating my attendance. I'm very happy to be once again at the Holy See. Nigeria is a highly populous country of more than 180 million people. It is a major sub-regional power in Africa and a strategic country both in Africa and in the world political order. On 21/2/2012, the United Nations Security Council met to consider matters related to serious threats to international peace, security, and stability in different parts of the world, particularly in Africa and the Sahel region, posed by transnational organized crime, including weapons, drugs, and human trafficking. Nigeria, like most other countries, is affected by the human trafficking problem. It is a source, transition, and destination country. Nigeria, in 2003, became the first country in Africa to enact an anti-human trafficking legislation with the Trafficking in Persons Prohibition, Enforcement, and Administration Act, which in turn created the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP. The current legislation, amended 2003 legislation, was enacted in 2015. Most countries in Africa copied verbatim the Nigeria Act. This new act included certain other offenses not included in the original act, and included the prohibition of the organ trade. Previously, the sanction for possession of human parts, body parts, was laughable because nobody really knew what the human parts were meant for. In the past, the human organ trade was not recognized. Most people thought that when missing bodies were found with parts missing, they were victims of ritual murder. But now, most law enforcement and the Act recognize what is happening. The forms of organ trafficking include traffickers who trick the victims into giving up an organ for no cost, con artists who convince victims to sell their organs but who do not pay or who pay less than they agreed to pay, and doctors who treat people for ailments they do not have in order to remove the organ without the knowledge of the patient. And then there's another category of people kidnapped and their organs are removed, or people trafficked and their organs are removed. In order to address every aspect of human trafficking phenomenon, NAPTIP adopted the 4P strategy. These include prevention using mass media campaigns to raise public awareness. I came across their campaign, one of their campaign strategy. If you are caught and you had not actually completed the offense, you are given a yellow card. If you are caught and you had completed the offense, you are given a red card. So that is part of the campaign strategy of NAPTIP. Their campaign includes protect their 4P strategy. The second one is protection, which involves rehabilitating and reintegrating victims into society. For example, we discussed this yesterday at length, the Trafficking Trust Fund, where money is sourced to take care of the immediate needs of the rescued victims. I confirmed this yesterday night because I too wasn't sure whether, like other countries, no fund is actually put in that fund in Nigeria, and I was told that the NAPTIP is part of NAPTIP's budget to ask for and to secure funds for the Trafficking Trust Fund. Also, the Act provides that the property of offenders, which are judged to the process of crime, will be forfeited to the trust fund from where victims are compensated. And then victims are accommodated in shelters when the trial is going on, and then victims who are taken with those they are traveling with are accommodated in shelters so that before the authorities will confirm whether or not those traveling with them are family or not. Then prosecution. That's one of the P's. It includes the arrest and prosecution of offenders in order to decrease the culture of impunity associated with these offenses because of the general feeling that victims are complicit in the crime. The courts in charge of this type of prosecution are the state high courts, the federal high courts, and the national industrial courts because of the labor content of human trafficking, because usually the excuse is that this person is going to work somewhere. So they are taken to the perpetrators are taken to the national industrial court. The point I want to make of this point is that trial judges must not allow witnesses, particularly victims, to be harassed during trial by the defense that the victims were complicit in the crime and that their parents or guardians consented to their movement for purposes of manual labor or as a sex worker. Sometimes the parents actually know what is going to happen. They do know. So, but that does not absolve the perpetrators of the commission of the offense. So this has always been a big persuasive argument by defense lawyers. The last piece, partnership. The NAPTIP is partnering with all other organizations, both international and national, to tackle the problem. I will talk about the Benin Directorate of the agency specifically, because right now I work in the Benin division of the Court of Appeal. So I was able to get some statistics from Benin. Most of the cases of trafficking in women and children in Nigeria at the inception of the agency arose from Benin City in Edo State and its environs, which is still notorious for being a hotbed of crime in regard to the topic of this summit. I don't have the data for the whole of Nigeria, but was able to get data from the Benin Directorate of NAPTIP. Within a year of the inception of the agency and the setting up of the Benin Directorate, the first case of AGF versus Sarah Okoya was prosecuted by the agency. That's actually the first case prosecuted to successful completion in Nigeria. 6 girls were recruited by the defendant, who promised to take them to Spain. She took them to Cotonou in Benin Republic and collected a huge amount of money from them to process their traveling papers to Spain. She lodged them in a bamboo hotel in Cotonou and made them sleep with men before they could travel on the next leg of their journey to Spain, after taking them to a shrine to swear an oath of secrecy. Some of them resisted, and it caught the attention of the hotel staff, who reported to the Nigeria consulate, and after investigation, the defendant was arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced by the Federal High Court on 19/11/2004 to 3 years imprisonment. In my paper, I drew attention to 3 other cases, FGN versus Nwa Budike Ikechukwu, delivered last year, 25/1/2017. The defense threw up several technical defenses which were rejected by the court because of the evidence that the 20-year-old victim was an in-law of the defendant who was abducted by him on her way to run an errand, and who then transported her to Ivory Coast, where she was subjected to prostitution. The defendant was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment and 1 million naira fine. In AGF versus Franca Edith Ashibola, the court rejected the defense that the victims had paid their own transport fare to Burkina Faso en route to Italy for domestic work, and that because they were over 18, they consented to being prostitutes while she saved their proceeds for them. The defendant in that case was only 27 years old, was sentenced to 5 years. In FGN versus Roy Raji, the defendant was 57 years old, charged with deceitful inducement and forced labor of several girls to Kuwait. The victims paid part of the money for the trip, but were made prostitutes in Kuwait instead of doing domestic work. The thread running through these cases is the refusal of the honorable judges to succumb to persuasions of technical arguments and their insistence on the application of the substantive law, where the factual ingredients of the offense had been proved. I commend this approach to other judges in order to reduce the impunity associated with these offenses. I also note what Judge Fiona of Malawi said about the refusal of the High Court to reverse the magistrate court only on the technical ground that the perpetrator's trial took place in prison for his protection and not in open court. That is the kind of approach we should canvass for each other and for our sisters when we get back home. In the Benin Directorate, the statistics show that there is no average age for offenders. Arrests have been effected on offenders as young as 20 years and offenders of 70 years and above. The number of victims between 0 to 17 years recorded is 1,140. Number of victims between 18 and 27 years, 1,580. Number of victims above 27 years, 86. The number of offenders charged to court in that directorate from 2003 to date is 51, consisting of 27 guilty pleas, 20 prosecution on the merit that led to conviction, and 4 acquittals. Unfortunately, it is not all reports that yield to the successful rescue of victims. Over 1,870 victims have been rescued since 2004. They include young girls and young boys. The Nigerian Education Research Development Commission now places human trafficking in all primary school curriculum. It's very important to sensitize even young children to this scourge. Then let me speak briefly about the challenges faced by the commission, the agency in general, particularly Benin, where I had the opportunity to interact with the assistant director in charge of that area. The challenges include lack of provision of equipment and logistics for enforcement officers and lawyers, lack of capacity building of staff, inadequate funding. Other operational challenges include the fact that prosecution collapses when victims are intimidated into refusing to give evidence, leading to the slow pace and few number of prosecutions. Also, witness protection measures are insufficient to insulate willing witnesses from organized syndicates. The enforcement officers do not carry arms, and the organized crime syndicates sometimes resist arrest. This is a major problem. The scourge of domestic, and I'm echoing what my sister Bolaji Yusuf said, the scourge of domestic and international human trafficking can only be minimized where the societies and governments live up to their responsibilities to their citizens, and the hopelessness and desperation of young people to look for greener pastures by any means can drastically reduce. The CNN expose by Nima El-Bagher of modern-day slavery, whereby men and women trafficked through Libya are sold in open market as slaves, is both horrifying and a wake-up call on all stakeholders to be conscious of the blurred lines between human trafficking and actual modern-day slavery. We are trying to shy away from using the word slavery, but that is what most of these situations amount to. We are judges circumscribed by the ambit of the law on what we can actually do in court to ensure that this scourge is minimized, if not eradicated. We are shapers of opinion and sometimes policy in our different countries, and we can ensure that social and welfare workers step in to monitor victims. Because I have discovered, particularly in the Benin area, because when I did a bit of research around that area, because I was planning to come to this summit, most of the victims rescued still go back because there's nowhere else to go, there's nothing else to do. So I highly commend the Women Judges Association liaising with other NGOs and lawyer groups like FIDA to have a program on ground. These victims who are rescued from prostitution, it actually takes very little of our financial resources to support them. If you give somebody 50,000 naira, that's our own money, to start a trade, that person might not go back to prostitution. You have rescued him from the person, but then you after the prosecution or the successful or unsuccessful prosecution, what happens next? That is where we can come in. We must give back to society. I believe passionately in that. I appreciate the Holy Father's concern about these issues, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the discussion and to learn from my colleagues all over the African continent. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot since yesterday.